Train tracks destroyed by floods in southwest England, London in chaos because of strikes. Will the proposed £42 billion HS2 rail plans be a beacon for a brighter future for British railways? So far, there have been major planning delays and the engineering contract designs are already £11 million over budget. HS2 hasn't even begun construction, and Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls says legislation won't pass before the 2015 general election. So if Labour wins the election and decides to scrap HS2, the whole rail scheme could end up being a pipe dream. In fact, one former Secretary of State thinks the whole thing is actually a nightmare. With me is Frank Dobson, a former Health Secretary and the MP for Holborn St Pancras. Welcome to the programme. Frank, let's start with your opposition to HS2 and the fact, of course, that your government or your party established it in HS2 in 2009.
Well, it was wrong from the start. It was wrong when the Labour government proposed it, and it's wrong when the Tory Lib Dem government are pursuing it now. If we do need improvements in our railway system, but there are much cheaper and more effective ways of achieving it than having one high-speed line costing £50 billion.
You call it a vanity project?
Well, I think it is a vanity project, really. It's people thought, oh, well, we've got to really attract attention and it's something really forward-looking. Well, there's nothing forward-looking about spending £50 billion to achieve something that you could probably achieve for about 20 billion.
So you'd oppose your current shadow Mary Cray over this project, £50 billion
utterly opposed
project?
to the scheme. On the day that it was announced, together with someone from my office, I delivered a leaflet through the 200 and odd doors of people whose homes were going to be demolished in my constituency. I've been opposed to it all along. Originally, I was just opposing it from what you might describe as a parochial point of view, the idea that...
The NIMBY view.
Well, yes, but as I put it, it wasn't NIMBY, that's not in my backyard in this case. For a point more than 200 people, it was going to be 200 people with 200 homes. It was going to be not through my front room. It wasn't backyard at all. But I was opposed to it for local reasons, but the more I've looked into it, the more I'm convinced that it is really a waste of money. And it's now being sold on the basis that it would bring great benefits to the 5 cities outside London, which will be most closely affected by it.
Even before we get to that, though.
Well, Birmingham, Nottingham, Leeds, Sheffield and Manchester. Well, if it's £50 billion and it's intended to help economic growth in those 5 cities, I'm willing to bet that if you broke it up into 5 lots of £10 billion and said, here you are Nottingham, here's £10 billion, and here you are Leeds, here's your £10 billion, the odds against them deciding that their priority will be to club together to buy a high-speed railway, negligible.
So even though trains in France and Germany 170 miles an hour, R1s 125 miles an hour, Britain began the railways, you're not swayed by the need for speed?
Well, my understanding is that in France now they've decided that they spent too much on the high-speed system and have decided that they need to divert a lot of effort into improving the non-high-speed part of their system. But the other thing is, France is geographically a much bigger country than ours.
So and it's too small to have a fast railway.
Its big cities are much further apart, and therefore the benefits of high speed are considerably greater.
Your Shadow Chancellor seems to be turning towards your view. Did you gauge that?
Well, I think more importantly, our former Labour Chancellor, Alistair Darling, has been expressing his severe doubts about it.
Why have the costs spiralled out of control then, since Labour announced it in 2009?
Well, if you take it in my area, the original estimate for a really big scheme at Euston was 1.2 billion. When they looked at it again, they discovered it would be 2 billion. So that's quite an escalation, isn't it? £800 million. And for the the connection between HS2 and the Channel Tunnel link, which is only 2.4 kilometres long. The original estimate was £170 million, and that went up to £300 million. So in my constituency alone, before any excavations have been made, before any trial bores have been made, while it's still just a desk exercise, they've increased the costs of the works in my constituency by £1 billion. That just shows that the people in charge of it aren't fit to run a whelk stall, let alone a railway.
They're getting a lot of money. I'm going to get on to the people that are running the scheme, but the Institute of Directors seems to be backing you, the trade unions. They want it. ASLEF, they support the HS2.
Well, I think they support it because it's money that's being spent on the railways, but I think it's the wrong money being spent on the railways.
It could be in the way that you've just outlined. It could be lots of different small projects regionally.
Well, exactly. I think the money could be better spent to make better improvements in the railways. And certainly, if it's allegedly going to benefit the north, why don't they start it in the north? Why is it that it'll be, I'll be into my late 90s before a train finally rolls into Leeds, if it goes ahead?
Is that because of the way Labour set it up in 2009, or is this been a change?
No. The present government could decide which end of the line you start at.
Philip Hammond said, well, of course, a factory worker from Manchester won't be taking the HS2. Is there an element here of we're going to create a two-tier rail system using HS2?
It is the case on the continent that usually if you travel on the high-speed trains, you pay a higher fare. But there needs to be better connections between West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire and Manchester. Better connections between Manchester and Liverpool. But those aren't part of this proposition. And those sort of changes and improvements would bring greater benefits to the economy and the people in those areas. Well, after all, I come from Yorkshire myself.
Why do you think your party then supports HS2?
Well, I think they got locked into it.
No, Ed Miliband can now say that was the old leadership of the Labour Party, surely, and say, forget it.
Well, as I say, I think they got locked into it originally, and it's a bit difficult to say, oh, well, let's go back on it now.
Although maybe there might be a change. I know there's been some criticism of the fact that Sir David Higgins from London 2012, the Olympics, he's on $591,000 a year. Simon Kirby, the CEO, 6 times higher than his predecessor, Alison Munro. How are these costs being decided? What does the Labour Party, do you think? How do you think that'll be treated?
Well, I've no idea what the official Labour Party line is, but I mean, we've got the situation
Sneaking suspicions as to what they think about it.
Well, I simply don't know, but all I can say is that these are grotesque salaries to be paying people, and I don't think they can be justified in any way whatever. I suspect they'd both be willing to do their jobs for a lot less.
Even though this relatively new Transport Secretary, Patrick McLaughlin, says absolutely justified, these salaries for such a large infrastructure project.
Well, yeah, but he's from a party who thinks that bankers' bonuses are justified.
You obviously believe in the importance of people transporting around the country. I mean, one could even say, as health secretary, you believe people should be moving around from hospital to hospital. Why is it you're so against people being able to move much quicker from one part of the country to another?
It's a very limited proposition. It would go from, initially, just from London to Birmingham, right? That's all. And the odds are that it would shift some economic activity from Birmingham to London, not London to Birmingham. That, if you look at what's happened in every other country where they've introduced...
Yeah, but if you're commuting from Birmingham every day at the moment, it's much easier, obviously, with an HS2 line. So you don't have to commute that far.
So you make it easier and quicker, and more people do it.
Right, but is that, what's wrong with that?
Well, that's not going to benefit Birmingham, that benefits London. And one of the things that's observable where high-speed trains have been introduced is that they've tended to shift economic activity towards the centre.
Frank Dobson, thank you.